Arysta LifeScience Mauritius, which we are featuring. But maybe just one small note on what is Abax Forum. Abax Forum is in fact a forum which we have put in place mainly to demonstrate and to give a bit more visibility and explain a bit better what is the global business sector about. I think for many people, pour le commun des mortels à Maurice, the offshore sector, as they call it, is very often seen as something linked with money in and out, maybe money which is not necessarily very clean, and they hear all that is happening in India, and so it's a bit of a nebulous concept that people have about the global business sector. Abax Forum attempts to demonstrate that this is not effectively what the global business sector is, and that it is real business that is behind the GBCs that the Mauritius management companies manage, and encouraging these players to be present in Mauritius as far as possible. In fact, this is a bit what Abax as a company is trying to do as well. Very rapidly, I think we've moved from our fiduciary responsibilities of acting for clients. We still do that as a core business, but we try to engage more and more with our clients in order to understand their business better, in order to see how we can add value to their business. This means, therefore, that when we sit on the board of our clients, when we administer their affairs in Mauritius, we try and understand what else are they doing, and how can we bring value to them, and how can we facilitate their business. So today we will listen to John Barnes. John is the CEO, Africa, Middle East of Arysta LifeScience. And as you may have seen from the invitation, Arysta is in fact one of the largest agro-chemical companies in the world. I think originally it is from Japan, but John will talk more about that, we speak more about that, but it's a truly global company, present in 125 countries, and mainly with the main focus on agro-science and crop care. I think the only thing I'd like to add really at this stage is that when Arysta engaged us as service providers and they decided to come over to Mauritius, the main reason why they did that, as I understand it, was that they were doing an M&A. They were, I think, acquiring a company in India. And they were advised to use Mauritius to invest into India, and this is what they did. But they did not necessarily at that time have in mind that Mauritius could be used for other purposes. When they came and we engaged with Arysta, our people explained, what else can we do, why Mauritius could be used, and I think John and his team were very receptive to that, and we went over to South Africa to discuss with other people of Arysta, and in the end, they saw, okay, but why don't we use this subsidiary in Mauritius to do other things in Africa? A substantial part of their turnover is already linked, or was already linked with Africa, and therefore the question was, how can we use Mauritius better as a base to do business in Africa? And this is how it all happened, that today Arysta has a presence in Mauritius and is using Mauritius for specific reasons in Africa that John will explain to you. So this in fact goes in that direction for us, Abax, to try and see and encourage our clients to do business from here, to do business from Mauritius into Africa and other places in the world. And in fact, the example of Arysta is even more than that, because they are now doing business also in Mauritius. And I think that's a good example of global business companies that can partner with Mauritian companies, and I think possibly here also in the field of agricultural research. There's a number of things which Arysta can do, bring competencies to the country. So doing business from here, doing business in Mauritius, and not only doing business through Mauritius. So I think this is the key message I wanted to pass through, and I'll hand over to John for the presentation.
Thanks very much.
Well, good afternoon or good evening. All the ladies look very beautiful, and all the men, most of you look very comfortable in your ties because you're clearly in commerce. But there are also some agronomists amongst us, I can see, who look less comfortable in their ties. And these are the guys that may ask me the difficult questions, but I look forward to those. And maybe just in a lighter note, I'll start with a little story of Einstein. In fact, when he was doing his roadshow in his time, and he'd been traveling with his chauffeur on all this roadshow to explain his theories. And eventually, after a few months on the road, he said to his chauffeur, you know, you've heard my story so many times, you know, why don't you just give it to him? Why don't you just give him a half? And he sat in the front row, and all went well, and he gave the lecture perfectly. And then there came the question at the end, and the very learned professor stood up and asked him a very long and detailed question. And he said to him, sir, that is a very fundamental question. In fact, it's so simple that my chauffeur will answer that question to you. And so if there are any questions, I have a couple of chauffeurs with me. I have my team, the rest of the team here. Also, we have our business partner in Mauritius, Clifford Dove from Roger Feder, with us here as well. So please feel free to ask questions as we go. And also thanks, Abax, for making this opportunity to us. And thank you for welcoming us, all of you, to Mauritius. It's been about 9 months, I guess, since we first put our permanent establishment down here, and that was myself and Philippe and Ray Ducray in the middle. So we are the 3 pioneers, and we now have an office in Bambous at Midi. So we happily ensconced in Mauritius. So I wanted to talk a bit about Africa, and some of this may not be all that new to many of you. You all have some business in Africa, but I wanted to just talk a bit about Africa agribusiness, a little bit about Arysta, and then maybe at the end a few messages about our time here in Mauritius and what maybe we could improve in Mauritius. So very quickly, and I'll go through this at high speed, we are owned by private equity. We're probably the biggest privately owned company in agriculture, but we are just off the top 10 in the world, so we're not the biggest, we're off the top 10. But nevertheless, we're owned by Primera Holdings, which is a European private equity company. And they have an interesting portfolio because they have chosen feed, food, and farming as one of their key portfolios. And you'll see they not only own Arysta, which is us, which is in crop protection and nutrition, but also Netafilm, which is an Israeli company in irrigation. They own Provimi, which is in feed solutions. They also own down the food chain, food additives, also frozen foods, down to sushi places and pizza operations in Japan. So they really have a very big food focus. Just a few things about agriculture. You know, if you look back over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the CAGR of inputs, we are not the ones guilty for driving up the food price. We've only grown 2% in terms of the CAGR contribution. Clearly, there are big contributions through seeds, and that's through hybridization of seeds, more sophisticated seeds, nutrition in terms of fertilizer. But it's important to see that the crop protection is a very small part, only 4% of farmers' inputs, but it's a very important part. And it is really, if you look at seeds and fertilizer, it is about helping to grow the crop. And I think crop protection is about how do you protect the crop and protect the yield. It's also interesting, it is one of the most regulated industries in the world, probably on the scale of pharmaceutical, if not slightly more, because it's very highly regulated. And it gives you an idea of how long it takes to get just the last phase of development. So if you look at a product from first discovery to first registration, it's probably similar to pharmaceutical, somewhere around 10 to 15 years before it actually gets through all the hoops to the market. But the regulatory process in terms of biology is between 4 and 5 years to get registration. So very regulated. So you should never think about being concerned about residues in your crops. It's not the regulation. Sometimes it's the application of the regulation, but it's not the regulation. The regulation is very, very comprehensive and very, very detailed. We sort of break the industry into three, and one is the big science-based companies, which are the Syngentas, Bayer, the BASF, etc., which are what we call the R&D companies. So they invest all the way down the value chain. We have the generic-focused companies like UPL, Cheminova, you may know of, Indian companies, which are very much cost-driven, generic companies. And then we have a group that we call solution or asset-light companies, which is where we fall. So we're not in manufacture, we are in value add in terms of regulatory and marketing, but we're not into discovery in terms of chemistry. We actually license products from those companies that discover. And as I said, we're not in the top 10, but we are in a sector, and sorry you can't see the numbers, but we're in a sector which is a pretty profitable EBITDA ratio. You look at FMC, about 27% EBITDA ratio to sales. We a little less than that, but nevertheless, it is a very important sector. So solution-oriented companies seem to be ones that are growing the fastest. Interesting about us, we have somewhere, in fact now it's probably near 20% of our sales are in Africa. So traditionally, the big seven or the big six would be very much Eurocentric or North American and Latin America driven. So we are the market leader in Africa with the highest market share in our category. And a very substantial part of our business is in Africa. We have, I think, somewhere around 19 subsidiaries based largely in West Africa and Southern Africa and the Middle East, but a very strong footprint in Africa. And we do some formulation. So we have some factories that do customized formulation, and we have one in Ivory Coast, one in Burkina Faso, a big in South Africa and Senegal, and on the African continent. So we have some investment in the business. Robust new pipeline. We have a very big portfolio of registrations, and we also have a very big investment in green solutions. We have a few products that are very heavily into the green space, which I think is a very emerging space and a very important one. Also in value-added nutrients, so this are biostimulants and products that actually accelerate the growth and the plant's resistant to disease and other problems. And a very diverse customer base. We're also into malaria management in a very big way. We have, working with governments around Africa on malaria, trying to eliminate malaria, which is still the biggest killer of people in the world today. So that's quickly about Arysta. I didn't want to dwell too long, but just to give you a thumbnail of who we are. And then I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on Africa. And maybe some of you haven't seen this before, but I think it's a fantastic testament of a journey of 1 decade, from the hopeless continent 10 years ago to Africa rising. So this is a transition that's happened in 10 years, and so it is really a most incredible transformation, and it's not over. I think there's still a great opportunity ahead of us. Africa tomorrow, I think you've probably seen these figures. This is 128 million households. It's 1.1 billion people of working age. And in fact, Africa will have around about 20% of the working population in the world by 20 years. So it is a massive change that's occurring. And this one I wanted to just spend a minute on, because this is a really interesting demographic. If you look at 81% of the global population will be in Africa or Asia by the turn of the century. 80% of the population. So you'll see Asia starting to tail off in terms of growth rate. Africa, the one in the middle line, is the one that's absolutely exploding. Africa, you can see absolutely exploding. So then, if you combine that with another factor, which is, where is the biggest food deficit? It's actually in Asia and Africa. So if you take those two, you're looking at what I've called a perfect storm. You have 80% of the population in Africa and Asia. You have 80% of the world's food deficit in Africa and Asia. And you can't afford the carbon footprint of shipping corn and soybean from South America to Africa and Asia to feed the world. So, we have to do something. We have to grow our own food in Africa. There is no other way. We also, the fourth point to me is we have a limited number of large commercial farmers. We have probably the biggest population of smallholders in the world, and we haven't managed to capture that opportunity. I'm going to come back to talk to that in a few minutes. So, we probably all saw this in The Economist. How do we feed the 9 billion? And this is a challenge that all of us in agriculture have to address. If you look at the available land, there are only really two places left where there is available land, and that's in Latin America and in Africa. Latin America is already heavily developed, so the biggest single opportunity is in Africa. I want to just open it if I can, just on a report. And this, I think, was this was a McKinsey report, as far as I remember. Just gives you an idea where the opportunity that still exists in terms of land availability. And you can see the big blue and the small blue. In fact, the Latin American era is actually passing in terms of available land. I think they're obviously producing a huge amount of land because of their improved productivity, but in terms of available land, it's right here. It's got to be in Africa. And it's going to be smallholder. There is no other option. And there are a lot of reports, which if anybody's interested afterwards, I can give you reports of these, but there is a lot of reports around to do with the challenge of why has Africa become a net food importer? How do we grow and unlock the potential of the African continent from an agribusiness point of view? And clearly, the other thing that's absolutely critical, that this can't be done alone. Anybody that thinks that the African continent can be opened up for agribusiness alone, it's not going to work. It needs policy and regulation, consistent policy regulation aligned with business, and we have to take a value chain approach. There's no ways that a single company can unlock this potential. The other important thing is food price increases are here to stay. This is a reality for a number of reasons. One, limited land. Secondly, growing population. And the third part is actually interesting, is that the farmer is now producing more produce. If you think 5 years ago, we didn't produce fuel from agricultural crops. We didn't produce packaging material for agricultural crops. We didn't produce pharmaceutical from agricultural crops. We didn't produce plastics, electricity. Mauritius is a great example, producing one of the leaders in terms of electricity generation from biomass of crops. So competition for what the farmer will produce is also changing. They're producing more diverse, and my message is clear. One, we need to respect our farmers and look after them and make sure it's a healthy future, because we are very dependent on agriculture, no matter what industry you're in. And then the second phenomenon I think is interesting. You're looking at supermarkets and how they're going to change our lives. And already you'll see in the cocoa industry, for instance, and Philippe lived in Ivory Coast for many years. The cocoa industry now it's all about fair trade coffee, it's fair trade cocoa, it's the Rainforest Alliance that are producing protocols that crops need to be grown by, which are good things. And how do we get these smallholders to produce good quality, high potential crops? And just a message here, in Africa, and you look at all the ShopRites and the Pick n Pays and these supermarkets that are investing, it's interesting to look at wherever the yellow bits are. That's actually not too far away from Mauritius. So this is going to be a huge opportunity for us in Mauritius, and we need to capitalize on it. I think the other trend, and this is not just, these are all Chinese pictures, but this is not just the Chinese problem, consuming. As we get more disposable income, we consume more, and we consume more packaging material, we consume more high value add products, we change our diets to eat more affluent food, and the second part is we're urbanizing. The urbanization trend is incredible. I mean, and it's not just China. If we look at Ivory Coast, Ivory Coast was, I guess, the turn of the century, which is only 11, 12 years ago, I guess. 13 if you do the maths properly. there was about 20% of the population lived in the cities. 10 years' time, it's going to be more than 50. So this is an urbanization trend that is incredibly accelerating at an incredible pace. Right, and the places that are high. I mean, China is probably way beyond the 50% mark. It's probably 65% urbanized population. So large populations, Africa and Asia, eating differently, urbanizing. This is creating a major change. So we need to produce more from less, and with more regulation, which is absolutely critical. There'll be more concentration around the farmer. There's more concentration around purchasing of the supermarkets, and this disposable income will drive more consumption in a different consumption, and then urbanizing. So these are really major emerging trends that we face. So I guess every decade brings about change, and if you think about the next decade, what could be the Christmas 2020 headline be? It's something we're thinking about, and it's only a decade away. It's not that far away. And if you think what's happened in Africa in a decade, pace of change goes faster and faster and faster. So a decade gets shorter, especially for those of us who get a bit older. A decade gets a little shorter. I guess you remember less than you did when you were a kid. So I hope that somewhere in the next decade there will be a headline that says African smallholders will be feeding more of the world, because that's going to be our challenge. If we don't do that, we will not be successful in feeding our continent. The smallholder is currently hardly exists as a market sector. There are smallholders, Clifford, you'll tell us, in Mauritius, but we need to nurture these, we need to grow them, we need to technify them. The issues we have about poor enforcement of regulation is often because there's not education. So I think there's a big challenge for us on smallholder development. And I think it starts with nutrition. Just as an example, if you look at Africa, we use between 9 and 10 kgs per hectare of nutrition. Okay? In Asia, it's 150 kgs per hectare. So we are just so far behind on nutrition. And there is another message here, which I also want to quickly give to you on nutrition. I hope I can find it. Get my notes, sorry. What page is that? The message was there was actually a comparison between Zambia and the US. The price of fertilizer in Zambia is 4 times the price of fertilizer in the US. And a couple of factors. One is inefficient logistics, unrealistic margins that are taken, the cost of corruption is a very, very big factor in the cost of goods. So I think the other message is how do we manage this corruption that is actually penalizing the smallholder and penalizing the producer of crops. This is an issue that is not going to go away, and I think in the next decade, if we can't solve that and solve the smallholder issue, we'll leave this Africa in much worse shape than what it is now. And I think the other important thing is about corporate smallholder. And if I talk about corporate smallholder, there's plenty of examples of this where you've got cooperatives that are actually funding inputs for smallholder. So if you look at the cotton industry, you look at the cocoa industry, you look at many industries, corn industry, where you get corporations that actually fund the input costs for the smallholder. This is a very important part, so we all have a role to play in that. So just on food, finish off on food, obviously there are some major shifts in the global food. The issue is here, around us in Africa. We need to know our value chain, we need to partner, and we need to find ways to finance smallholder and finance this innovation. So the last part I wanted to share with you is a few things about Mauritius and what can Mauritius do and what can they do. Yeah, to me, one of the biggest assets we have is that we have a very bilingual population of the two most important languages in Africa, French and English. And I think our experience here has been, it is fantastic to be able to have a customer service team here that can speak to all our customers across Africa, barring Portuguese, but I'm sure we can find someone that can speak some Portuguese for those two countries. But in essence, these are the key languages. So how do we make more of that? How do we make more of the location of Mauritius? As I said, the supermarkets are all driving up from the south. Mauritius is 3 hours from Johannesburg. The flights are quite good, but what about Ethiopia? What about getting to West Africa? You know, we have this great asset of having French as our main language, but anybody trying to travel to Abidjan or travel to Ouagadougou in Burkina, it's not facile. It's not easy. You've got to go to Dubai, and then Dubai, you've got to go down to Accra, and then Accra up to Abidjan, or you've got to fly to Johannesburg and up to Accra, and then get a Malian airline up to Abidjan. So, you know, I just think that if there's something that the Mauritian authorities could do, is have a look at improving our links. The same issue if you want to fly to Ouagadougou through Kenya, you wait a day in Kenya, on the way back you wait another day, so your week is gone. So, if we don't be able to open this up, you know, we're not going to be able to get to our continent. So that's the one challenge I'd like to put forward. Ethiopia would be an interesting one because Ethiopia flies to Lusaka, flies to Harare, flies to Ouagadougou, flies to Douala, flies to Toronto. In fact, you know, it goes everywhere. So what about Ethiopia? And Ethiopia, on top of this, is a huge emerging market which maybe hasn't arrived yet, but I think it's on the edge of a major emerging. The other one is on, you know, Mauritius has got already on a path of they're the most diversified economy in Africa. And I've actually referenced it, if anyone doesn't believe me, it's the most diversified economy. And it's been an economy that's been diversified over the last, I guess, decade. So it's a major achievement and a major change and a very successful one. It's also the country with the highest GDP in Africa. So if you think of the most diversified with the highest GDP per capita, you know, why can't we make more of that? Education. I'm afraid to say, the reference I show you, Mauritius is one of those 4 countries where it has actually shown one of the biggest declines in the value of education. And again, I can pick it up for you. So what are we doing about education? And I'll come back to that in a second. You know, researchers per million. You know, obviously, Japanese has got the highest researchers per million population. I think I've actually got the numbers here somewhere. Africa is way down. Africa is the lowest. I think it's 89 researchers per million population. So what are we doing about getting our research and postgraduate people up to a much higher standard? In sugar specifically, and Clifford will maybe bear me out, and Ray will bear me out, and others, you know, 20 years ago, the leaders in sugar, technologists, all came from Mauritius. I'm sure today leaders in production of energy from sugar is still in Mauritius, but I think, how do we keep it momentum? How do we get back to being a technology leader in agriculture and in sugar specifically? The investment engine. You know, the biggest investor in Africa is China, and the second biggest one is private equity. Those are the 2 biggest investors, and I've got a quick chart on that if anybody's of interest. Yeah, we now fly to Beijing twice a week. We fly to, depending which route you go, but you can get to Shanghai pretty easily. How can Mauritius be inside that investment engine? And obviously, the big benefit is transparency in terms of compliance and taxation. These exist in Mauritius, and we should continue to build on those. So, my final slide, then obviously please feel free to ask any questions if you would like. You know, my president that I aspire to is not the current one, I'm afraid to say, but this particular man is a great legend, and he said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And it's just a question to Mauritius. You know, could we be, for those of us that do business in Africa, the biggest challenge we're going to face is about human capital. Where do we recruit people? Where do we find people who can run our businesses successfully? You know, can Mauritius be that leader in the creation of human capital? And is there an opportunity for, you know, subsidizing Mauritian graduates into corporations around Africa to actually help corporations and also help Mauritius? And I think many of you who know the system in France, the VIE system, which is basically postgraduates that you know, apply for placements across Africa, and the French government subsidizes those placements, and within a very short time, generally those people who are successful will be recruited by that company, and so the French influence in technology remains, and so it goes. So I just wonder if there isn't something that the Mauritian government could consider, because this would help companies that want to expand in Africa, and secondly help our Mauritian people to get off the island and to be part of the mainstream economy in Africa. So I think that's a question that may be worth debating at some stage. So I hope I wasn't too long, Richard, but just wanted to close there, and thank you for welcoming us to Mauritius. We're very happy. We've had a great experience. We were very happy with the speed of getting set up in Mauritius. Obviously, we were fortunate to have Abax to help us, but yeah, I think my occupation permit took, how long was it you on? 3 or 4 days? Yeah. Philippe was a little bit longer because he was missing some documents, and Ray was pretty quick. You know, so I think the infrastructure for setting up in Mauritius has been fantastic. It's very quick, it's very fast, it's very efficient. I guess as you stay a bit longer, you find some other frustrations, but nevertheless, to get in is fantastic, and we're very happy to have a very able partner in Abax to get us set up. So thanks very much, and thanks for having us here today, Richard.
Thanks for the presentation. Just your comment about respecting the farmers and making them #1 is, I think, very interesting. And I think I've seen numbers elsewhere. The average age of a farmer is 57 in the US and Europe, so they're clearly not making any more farmers anymore. We've seen in Zimbabwe what happens when you disrupt the farming chain and go backwards by trying to force smallholders onto it. But is there enough actual smallholders that are in the pipeline in all these countries to actually to get that productivity out, or is that another big constraint? I mean, I don't know how many. I don't know which societies are emphasizing and motivating people to go into farming as a business as much as we used to. It's I don't know if that's a big constraint that you see.
Yeah, it's a great question, and in fact, if you look at East Africa, I think it's starting to do very well in terms of educating small farmers and actually getting momentum going. 75% of the food in East Africa is produced by small growers at less than 5 hectares. So most of the flour, you've got big flour conglomerates, obviously in Kenya, but if you look at the cotton that gets grown in Uganda and Tanzania, everywhere, it's a huge amount of smallholders. So I think East Africa is actually starting to get it right. And in fact, Philippe will know the company very well. There's a company that we work with as a distributor, which has a great slogan that says "Farming is cool," and this is their momentum to try and draw young people into our industry. I think South Africa is much more commercially driven. It's not very smallholder driven, but it should be. It will emerge. West Africa is all smallholder, so, but it hasn't actually bitten. And I think there's some limitations. I think microfinance is going to be one thing that we need to find a way. How do you finance these farmers? You have got the corporate smallholder that is financed by the corporations. So, the cotton ginnery that supplies the inputs for the cotton farmer and takes back the gin on a barter system. That's happening. But as these farmers, smallholders privatize, what are we doing about microfinance? I think finance is one of the biggest unlockers: technology, information to the farmer, and I think finance.
I think hearing what you're saying, that leads to the next question coming from a banker. What is it that that Mauritius can do to help that financing of agri and agribusiness in Africa? Is there anything that we can do, the financial sector here?
Yeah. I think it's trying to find partners in agribusiness. And as I said in the beginning, this is a too big a challenge for companies to manage. It has to be an affiliation or an alliance or a partnership. And I think that's where it has to start. We need to pioneer together to try to find solutions, because it's too big to chew for any one company. It's going to be alliances and partnerships. But I think I wasn't going to say this, but some banks disappoint us because they don't have an appetite for Africa, which is alarming. Others have a great appetite, which is great. Africa is risky, we know that, but if you've got local subsidiaries, and this is our experience, you've got local subsidiaries with local know-how, and you have that local presence, you can manage and mitigate the risk. Where you make the biggest mistake on risk is if you go into big tenders and you go into markets where you have no presence, and you don't know the ins and outs of how it operates, and that's when you lose your shit. And there are companies that have lost their shit. So I think, to me, the message is trying to find partnerships through alliance that needn't be formal equity alliances. They can just be partnership alliances. And I think these sort of forums are great to do that. And maybe we should have more agribusiness and banking forums and try and identify what are the key issues. And it's interesting because the guy some of the slides I plagiarized from a very smart guy in South Africa. But I did recognize him, John Purchase, who works for BizHub. And that's exactly what they do. They try and put together partnerships of different providers addressing agriculture. And I think it's a very interesting model. So, sorry, John, I did reference you.
Any more questions?
One question. We have not heard at all about genetically modified crops. What is the issue for in 30, 40 years to be able to feed that population, world population?
I didn't mention that, but it's a very good question. I think it's got a critical role. And let me just talk a bit about GMOs for a second, because I think our industry made some big mistakes in not educating people about genetic modified crops. And there was a lot of franken-food discussions and things that were ran out of control. All that genetic modification is about accelerating the breeding process. It's about selecting genes that you can breed faster. So it's just accelerating. If you think of corn, for instance, to breed our corn today, which came from Mexican origin, would have taken probably 300 or 400 years through selection and breeding to produce white corn or yellow corn as we know today. So from wild corn to our corn that we eat today, or maize or mealies or pop or whichever word you want to use, it took probably 300 years. Today, it's the same technology. It's just selecting genes that you can put together by understanding the genome better that accelerates the breeding process. So it's not a frightening concept. Obviously, you don't want to be involved in putting cross-organism genetics into crops. That is a challenge, and that's something we should not be doing. Personally, I don't think. But it's something that's in the early stages. But this is a way that will help feed the future. If you look at non-crop GMO, already I think about 70% of farmers in China produce cotton through insect-resistant genetic modification. The same in soybean, same in maize. I think if you look at Africa per se, South Africa has got maize corn that is genetically modified for resistance to herbicide and insecticide. Burkina Faso this year probably produced 65% of their cotton using GMO technology. Kenya, I think, we just passed a protocol that's allowed the testing of GMOs. So, yeah, it will be part of our future. That needs to be controlled, needs to be policed, it needs to be well communicated. People need to be aware of it. It needs to be labelled because people need choice. We have to have choice. So I think GMOs is something that will be one of the key tools to feeding us in the future, for sure. Thanks for the question. We as a company unfortunately aren't in that research profile. You know, this is the heavy traffic in terms of research investment. You know, it's the Monsantos that lead. It's you know, Bayer, Syngenta that really have made major investments, and this is a huge capacity of investment that is beyond the scope of our company. So look, we don't have anything in that pipeline. Thanks for the question. Clifford, I don't know. Clifford is our local expert in Mauritius. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about food safety or anything about Mauritius in general, because I think it's a good discussion to have.
Well done, first of all.
Just hold on, please.
Congratulations for the excellent presentation. I think you've really raised our thirst for Africa. I think Africa has got a lot to offer, as you say. But it's a bit of a question of chicken and egg, you know. Finance is one of the issues which actually, and I think very often finance, as you said, are a bit not very eager to earn, and because of the risk factor. But on the other side, I think one has to make a really think about it, that you must come up with projects that will actually put also confidence. Coming to Mauritius, well, I think that what's very important is to, as for us, and it also meets very well the strategy of Arysta, is that one mustn't forget that the more we go, the more we must really look into bringing competencies, really look at adding value. There is the big, nowadays, the more we go, the more there is a temptation to just trade. And by the trade is to just play on price only, and to bring down the price, and it's a battle that's never ending, because quality goes down, and we mean quality that goes down, and I mean there, unfortunately, we are inundated by a number of products coming from, as you know, from the east, and we end up with products which are often not very well regulated, that also go under the radar, or if I can say it that way. So there are issues where, if we want to, we have issues of food production in Africa, we must really bear in mind that food safety is about what you put in there. It's the same for pharmaceuticals as well. Producing food without any safety, I mean, you know, one must really think about it. So for here, this is one of the challenges that we're having at the moment, is that yes, we are doing quite well, I must say, into reaching self-sufficiency, but there is a lot to be done in terms of the actual regulation with regards to, I must say that the authorities are there, they've got quite strict regulations, as you know, but there is much more to be done to make sure that we really focus on the food safety aspect, and to make sure that when we come to our plate, we make sure that we've got something that's acceptable. Yeah, I think that's...
Thanks. I didn't leave the floor to either of my colleagues, Ray or Philippe, if there's anything you want to add, your experience, or any questions or comments.
Yes, I think that to add the comments on what was said just now, yes, it's very important, and the education topic is very important. I'm coming from Tanzania and Kenya, and you have two countries which are neighbors, and totally different development in terms of particularly in terms of education and agriculture. We have a very successful country in Kenya, a successful program of education in Kenya, including aspects in agriculture, with a market which is well regulated and very successful crops. And in Tanzania, we are far behind in terms of education, in terms of quality of production, in terms of and if you compare the potentials of the two countries, the potential is much higher in Tanzania, for example. So it's all coming from education, yes. And it's linking with the aspects of food production and safety for the consumers, yes.
I think just to make one final comment from my point of view was that I think in Africa we have some good opportunities now looking at a harmonized regulatory policy across COMESA in southern East Africa. So there's been negotiation for, I guess, now 7 or 8 years. They now have a framework. It's now about implementation. In fact, in the last 18 months in West Africa, under ECOWAS, they now have accelerated this common regulatory framework. So I think if we can get that in place, then I think that's a major step change in getting a common regulatory platform that can be applied to all countries. And then on top of that, the next challenge is going to be how do we get rid of the counterfeit material that comes under the radar from China. You know, as we said, in Kenya, it's probably very small, but in probably 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 3 farmers that buy a product in Tanzania are buying something that they didn't want because it's probably under the table and it's counterfeit. It's the same in Cameroon. Cameroon's probably 30% of the goods you see on the shelf are not what they actually are. They are counterfeit. So that's a big challenge for us. And if you can't control what's in the product, how can you manage the residues? That's a challenge. So that's got to be, if there's something we can get right, and I'm very encouraged by this common regulatory harmonization, because I think that is a major step change. And getting 6 or 7 countries in Africa to agree is not easy, I'm sure, but the fact that they've got them agree is fantastic.
Thank you very much, John and everybody. Thank you. Thank you a lot for this very insightful and high-level presentation, John, about all that you said about the agribusiness and about the opportunities in Africa. And I think the questions that you're asking are very, very relevant. I'm sure all of us, it touches all of us. And we do feel as well the need for Mauritius to engage more in education, in human capital development, in order to, among other things, of course, that you're talking of the agribusiness, but I think that is true for other industries as well, how we should really upgrade our education system in order to be able to do things in a better way and really be that place in Africa where we believe we can add value to the continent. So thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.